Yeah, I just had to do an update on it. I haven't played that one in a little while, so.
Every blurry and low vision sufferer must try this
Yeah,
healing
that's a
ritual
fun
that is
one.
leaving doctors speechless. If you wear glasses or contacts, you must see
Alright.
this.
Yeah, we'll play in a
When
little
a
bit.
doctor reveals an
I just got it
astonishing
updated
natural
and
way to
stuff.
reclaim the 20/20 vision you
I'm
were
gonna do
born
some
with in record
reading.
time. Did you know vision problems have absolutely nothing to do with your...
Some good things. How are you? Yeah, we were just updating our Clash game. I love that game. It's really fun. Alright. I do. I want to get Best Fiends again. I always had fun playing that one. How's that? Good? Alright. I believe it had cut off last time. Was it on page 90? He was sending his warning not to the King of Castile, but to the thousands of Castilian soldiers to whom Nuno's very name was fearful. I think we're about there, right? Okay, page 90, the peacemaker who went to war. Meanwhile, the Castilians had struck terror into the hearts of the Portuguese. However, and in a special war council at Abrantes, it was decided that rather than try to defeat this great Castilian army, Nuno should take advantage of their presence in Portugal to take his forces and attack Castile itself. This apparently good tactic was even suggested by Don John. Nuno, however, disagreed with Don John and the council, even though he thereby made a great many enemies, including Dr. John Desregias. I have heard your counsel, Nuno said, but I feel that were I to leave Portugal, where I defend my country, to go to Castile, where I would be an invader, that the Castilians would soon take Lisbon and then come out and cut me off in Castile. And since I am the general, it is for me to decide. With that, he rose, bowed to the king, and left the assembly. The council could do nothing. They would have been lost without Nuno, who held the following of the troops. Das Rigas pretended to rejoice at the young general's audacity, predicting that the presumptuous young knight would have his wings clipped. Nuno decided to go at once with the 3,000 men he had at his disposal to halt the Castilians before they got too far. He sent word to Don John that if the young monarch wished to join him, despite their differences of opinion as to how the campaign should be conducted, that he would be glad to have the master of Aviz as one of his officers. Don John went. Don John I of Castile was a year younger than Don John I of Portugal. This king of Castile was rather short and heavy-set, of melancholy aspect. He was of excellent character, but of exceedingly mild disposition. Excellent in a subject, but needing added forceful virtues in a king. He was not a good leader. He lacked both forcefulness and prudence. He often changed his mind and was more prone to listen to the flattery of selfish courtiers than to the counsel of his statesmen. He held long and frequent councils and usually did what he himself had planned before the council convened. This regal weakness in the king, together with constant weakness of health, made him restless, taciturn, unhappy. Taciturn, crossword, Taciturn, made him restless, taciturn, unhappy. Often racked with fever, he had to follow his army on a litter. Knowing this, Nuno felt somewhat compensated for being outnumbered 4-1 in men, and even more in materiel. Nuno sent his message to the King of Castile at Leiria, because that was the part of Portugal Nuno knew well. It was there that he had ridden as a boy, exploring every cave and brook, every woodland pass. Hastening there with his army, Nuno took up his position at Aljubarrota, and on an elevation where the Castilian army would pass between two deep and fast-flowing streams, thus gaining a tremendous advantage of position. The great and decisive battle of the war was about to be fought. There had been many clashes of arms, many cities taken, many skirmishes between Portuguese and Castilian patrols which we have not mentioned. All had contributed to the great pitch of excitement that gripped the contending forces as the climatic conflict approached. When the Castilian army neared Aljubarrota, somewhat ahead of the Second Army with its reinforcements and supplies, the counselors of the King of Castile urged him to wait for the reinforcements. But Don John, seeing a chance to take Nuno off guard by sending a tremendous force of cavalry to flank Nuno's forces, was impetus to give battle and gave immediate orders. It was August 14th, 1385, at dawn, the vigil of the Assumption. Nuno and his men were fasting in preparation for Our Lady's great feast. They rose before the sun to attend masses being said throughout the camp. Many of the men went to the Holy Communion, which in those days was frequent. With the rising of the sun, the Castilians appeared, and the call to battle was sounded. All day, almost until sundown, the Castilians maneuvered for position. Nuno had about 8,000 men. The Castilians had over 30,000. In arranging his troops, none Alvarez deliberately chose for himself, personally, the most dangerous position. His white banner, that had already seen the triumph of Artillerios, flaming with the red of the cross, undulated over his head. To all who looked at it, it seemed a promise of victory. On the ground, beneath the waving emblem, the general finally knelt in fervent prayer. As a pledge of his gratitude, he said to his Lady in heaven, "I shall erect a temple on this very spot for you after the victory." As the battle appeared imminent towards evening, Nuno rose and held up his hand to command silence. "To flee," he said seriously, addressing a much larger and different army than the one at Artillerios. "To flee would be a certain death. Fight, therefore, we must, like heroes. Stand firm with your lances, at rest until the enemy attacks. Then we shall drive them back, and the victory shall be yours." Almost as he was speaking, a tremendous roar, like thunder, broke from the thousands of Castilian throats. "Aelos! Aelos! At them! At them!" The shrill cries of the trumpets sounded in desperate appeal, with furious stamping of galloping horses. The vanguard of the Castilian cavalry, with colorful banners streaming in the wind, rushed headlong at a furious gallop against the waiting quadrangle of Portuguese. It was just 6 o'clock in the evening. "Portugal! St. George!" The cry of Nuno's troops was hurled back. Steady, seemingly fearless, they stood up under the shock of the careening phalanx. Yeah, that word. Phalanx? Yeah, what you said. You're always showing off. Anyways, Charging into the stubborn formation of the Portuguese, the Castilians' ranks. Hold on 1 second. Fix the music. Oops. All right, Portuguese. See, charging into the stubborn formation of the Portuguese, the Castilians' ranks were broken and became lost in irregular masses. The horses, rushing in their fury upon the thicket of inclined lances, were stricken to the ground. Their maddened riders hurled themselves down upon the foe. Disordered though they were, they almost broke through the line. Then, however, the two wings of Portuguese cavalry rushed forward. They hurled themselves into the breach. With them was a part of the rear guard commanded by the king himself. Thus they kept their fortress of flesh and blood intact, like an unshaken wall opposing the wave of Castilians. On both sides men fought like lions. Axes, swords, rapiers circled in tremendous blows. Arrows whistled through the air. Lance clashed on lance and burst in splinters. The very stumps became weapons of attack or defense in the hands of those heroic warriors. The peer of Portuguese poets, Lewis of Camões, writes, Their forceful volleys out the crossed bows pour, and clouds are darkened with the arrowy shower, and yet, foam reeking over their wavy mane, the snorting coursers rage and paw the plain. Beat by their iron hoofs, the plain rebounds, has distant thunder through the mountain sounds. Plain. Beat by their iron hoofs, the plain rebounds, has distant thunder through the mountains sounds. From W.J. Mickle's translation of Camões, Geo Bell and Sons, New York, 1892. Nuno, his flaming sword, the one that had been tempered by the prophetic armorer of Santarem and bore his lady's name, flashed here and there. Fearlessly the general pushed himself through the troops, shouting encouragement, fighting brilliantly. Each moment brought either a fresh treat or a fresh opportunity, and Nuno lived each moment as he had never lived any other moments of his life. Comparing him to a lion, Camões sings of him. Yet firm and undismayed, great Nuno stands, and braves the summit, and braves the tumult of surrounding bands. So from high Cuta's rocky mountains strayed, a raging lion braves the shepherd's shade. The shepherds hastening over the Titane plain, with shouts surround him, and with spheres restrain. He stops with grinning teeth, his breath he draws. It is not fear, but rage that makes him pause. Among the Castilians were many of those Portuguese who had stood against the separation of Portugal from Castile. Yet Portuguese or Castilian, those in the first lines fell under the shower of blows. Adalerios was being repeated. As the leaders fell, the Portuguese quadrangle seemed rather a slaughterhouse than a fortress, with the shrieks of dying men, the field slippery with blood, and the carnage continuing as the Castilians advanced. Finally, the spirit of the Castilian rear guard broke at the fearful sight. Despite the orders of the nobles to advance, they halted and began to head slowly backward. When this happened, their left wing, under the command of the prior of Crete, Nuno's brother, Don Peter Alvarez, made a frantic charge. But the charge was not only useless, it made matters worse. It ended in the impaling of the horses on Portuguese lances, because Nuno saw the charge coming and deployed a group of reserve infantry to meet it, and the violent hand-to-hand conflict that ensued only added to the confusion. The Castilian rear troops then broke in open flight, and in their flight overwhelmed and dragged with them the vast reinforcements which had begun to arrive. The King of Castile had foreseen a repulse similar to that at Adalerios, and his tactic was to attack the Portuguese quadrangle from the rear with a force of several thousand cavalry under the Grand Master of Alcantara. But Nuno had foreseen this in the maneuvering, and he had lances ready in the rear as well as in the front. And after the hand-to-hand fighting had begun in the front, with his men in the center of the quadrangle, raining arrows and lances into the Castilians as they piled up on each other, Nuno galloped to the rear to conduct the defense there. His presence everywhere was an inspiration to his men. Soon the joyful and triumphant cry was running from one Portuguese mouth to the other, "They flee! They flee!" And as night fell, the victorious Portuguese quadrangle broke in violent pursuit of a defeated enemy. The Castilian infantry, which had not even engaged in the combat, followed the disastrous rout of the cavalry and left behind all arms, baggage, supplies, fleeing towards Liria, whence they had come that morning. The vanquished king, wretched and feverish, was placed upon a mule and repaired in desolation to Santarem. The Portuguese losses were unbelievably few. Among the Castilian dead were many of the first nobility, including the brave master of Santiago and the two Pereiras, Don Peter and Don Diego. Nuno had killed two of his brothers, like Italian-American soldiers fighting in Italy in 1943, or German-American soldiers fighting in Germany in 1945. All was not glory, an adventure in war. We'll start chapter 9 later. That was the finish of chapter 8. You're welcome.